Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Master of Spin. I'm your host, John Williams. Today is Easter Sunday, so I wanted to pause and reflect a little bit about the idea of a non-believer talking about Jesus, the historical figure of Jesus. And I do it every Easter. I come back to Jesus during this time period. I watch the movie Jesus Christ Superstar, which has become kind of a ritual for me. And I think about Jesus as a human being and not as the Son of God. And I call myself a non-believer, but I was once a believer. So I grew up in the church. I grew up going to vacation Bible school, going to church every Sunday, youth groups on Wednesday, summer trips with the youth group, read my Bible through and through. And there was a time in my young life where I was a believer in the tenets of religion as well as the scriptures and doctrines, what it said. I did believe that a lot of it could be interpreted literally. But, I got older. My worldview began to change. I got educated to a variety of different subjects. I began to see some cracks in religion that I couldn't resolve in my mind. Evangelical leaders who had falls from grace, so to speak, that, were involved in all this money and manipulation of money and the taking advantage of parishioners and these temples that ultimately come down, Jim and Tammy Baker, Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, some of these evangelical leaders, the Crystal Cathedral here in Anaheim, driving by that on a weekly basis, this opulence, traveling in Europe and seeing these churches everywhere and rationalizing your mind how it must have been to be an illiterate peasant going into one of these houses of worship and being able to be programmed into the scriptures, programmed into the power of the clergy. So I began to see these fall from graces. I began to see, the exposure of the Catholic Church and their priesthood and what they were doing to kids for years and years, and the inability of the church to play a larger role in stopping it. And then I began to think about the literal interpretation, stories like Jonah and the whale, Noah's Ark, and things like that. And I began to see in my own mind the absurdity of those being literal, and began to understand the Bible itself as a series or chapters of stories as we try to rationalize our existence as human beings at that time. I mean, we don't have the printing press until Gutenberg, 1,500 years after the time of Jesus. So knowledge was not spread quickly. Most people were illiterate. So if you went into this church and you have this person open up this book, because one of the books that was available at the time were Bibles that were handwritten by members of the priesthood and stuff, and you would be very easy to be influenced. But as time marches on, we began to see challenges not only to Christianity itself, which splintered Christianity into different forms of religion, Catholicism, Protestantism, Lutheranism, a variety of things. But then we have the Mormons, we've got Jews, we have Hindus, we have Islam, and we have Judaism, all these competing and conflicting things. It's like, wouldn't there be one God? Why are there all these other concepts of God? A few other things happened, and I just said no on organized religion, no on going to church. But I always did keep a moral compass. I did get a lot out of the teachings of Jesus. Not the vindictive God of retribution in the Old Testament, but the man of the people who was pointing us into a new direction on how we should live within our own communities. The more empathy, the more compassion for our fellow man. So I look at it from a historical standpoint, and I also love music. So I remember in 1970 seeing Jesus Christ Superstar for the first time and just being totally blown away, because it was the first time in my life that I was able to pluck something out from the scripture and put it into a human form. The music of Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice just, blew my mind. The musical arrangements were unbelievable. Ted Neely's performance as Jesus, that voice that would go 3 or 4 different octaves. Carl Anderson as Judas. They made the people from that Bible that I read, it made them real people. The movies from the past, Greatest Story Ever Told, King of Kings, Ben-Hur, it didn't humanize it in a way that Jesus Christ Superstar did for me. And I'm not going to talk about what was good about it, what was bad about it. I can only reflect on what I got from it. So what I like about the film is it puts Jesus's last week into the context of the time and the struggles of the people. So you can see the priesthood, the Jewish priesthood. You can see their power. You can see the power of Rome. You can see the conflict between the priests and Rome. And you can see the conflict between Jesus and his band of disciples as he moves towards this inevitability. So, Jesus kind of just appears on the scene. And for a few years before this time period for the film, he's been making speeches, he's been giving sermons, he's been attracting a lot of attention. People like his message about community, about loving your enemies, about loving your brother. And, the idea here is the more people who believe in what he's saying, the more people will make a society that want to live like that. And of course, at any time in history, that becomes dangerous when people step up against the status quo. I mean, you think of Joan of Arc, Socrates, Muhammad, Jesus, Gandhi, Buddha, Martin Luther King Jr., Sophia Scholl, all these people in history who push against the oppressor, push against the power structures, and they ultimately become very dangerous. They can be imprisoned. In the old day, they could be excommunicated, or they could be crucified. I mean, the crucifixion of Jesus was nothing new at that time. Hundreds, if not thousands of people were being crucified across Europe during this time period. But of course, Jesus is a very dangerous individual. More and more people, the poor, the dispossessed, begin to be attracted. He's got more and more people that are following him. But because of communication of the day, the lack of a press, the lack of a way to spread the word, people would go from town to town and they would talk about something. And by the time it got to the 20th person who heard it, it was now taking, a couple fish and feeding the multitudes. Right. So it now became this guy could walk through the town and he was healing lepers. He was healing cripples. He was healing the blind. He even goes into a home and, the rotting, decaying corpse of Lazarus. He sits there and he brings him, back to life. So whether or not those things are believable, I will leave it to you. If you have a belief system, I'm not trying to change your belief system. But things like that is, in my mindset, the way it was able to spread. More and more people congregating, more and more people buzzing, talking about it till he becomes a danger to both the priesthood and Rome at the time. And I like the way with the songs and the arrangements where you can really see the emotion. When Jesus has these key moments in the film and he's singing, you can see the anguish in his face as he's delivering these words. You can see how he's troubled. He's troubled by what is happening outside. He's troubled with what is happening within his small group of followers that follow him around. He has given so much on his shoulders. He's become burdened by his fame, so to speak. And that really comes out in the film, especially the scene where he is questioning, God, why this path he is on is actually happening. He's done these things. He's continued to live this kind of life as prescribed by his Father. But in the end, he's confused at why he now has to do this final thing, why he's got to die for all of this to happen, for all of this to have closure and transform humanity for the rest of time. So he's really struggling with that. And man, when he hits some of those notes, it's absolutely incredible. And we see the struggle of Judas, Carl Anderson, struggling, knowing that he's going to betray Jesus, but in that betrayal, needing to make sure that somebody understands, that these priests understand that he's got no choice. This is something, the path he's been put on. He doesn't want to have to do what he has to do, and they're going to throw some money at him, right? Because that's going to make the priesthood feel better about what is ultimately going to happen to Jesus. And in that betrayal, which was foreseen by the man Jesus, the guilt that Judas feels in that, as you see him stumbling through, the desert in the final scenes before he commits suicide, because he can't live with the betrayal. That Jesus was this man of peace, this man of love, and there was no reason for him to participate in the demise of somebody that he loved dearly. So that, is a great thing. But then you also see in the film, when Peter denies Jesus 3 times, right? When they've come and they've taken Jesus away and people are talking about, these people here were hanging out, in the forest with him. And hey, I saw that guy talking to him. And Peter starts saying, man, it wasn't me. I had nothing to do with it, because, what kind of convictions do you have when you're trying to save your own hide? So you have that dynamic going on, how everybody is now in a crisis, a mental crisis, as these events are happening. And even Pilate, in the scenes when Pilate is trying to find some reason why he should be able to go after Jesus and why this guy should be executed or put on trial. What has he done? Why is he such a danger? And then he puts it off so Herod can deal with it. And Herod says, well, man, just give me a miracle or two. Change, walk across the water, change, blood into wine. Do something so I can believe what everybody says. You keep saying you're the Son of God. And Jesus says, man, I'm not the Son. I've never said that. You guys are the one that is saying that. I'm not the guy that's been saying that. And so who's going to make the big decision and take care of Jesus in the end? This man who has become extremely dangerous for ideas of love thy neighbor. Do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. Thinking about a kingdom beyond this life that they were living in, that the meek shall inherit the earth, that, the slow will be fast, the blind will see again. All of these things in this belief that in the misery of the thing we call life, that there is hope. And that if we all can collectively believe these things, then we can make a better life. And in making that better life, sometimes we can bring down the power structures that be. And that's what I really like about the film Jesus Christ Superstar. This time of year, I always come back and think about it, because most of my moral compass has been gleaned from what I learned and understood growing up reading the New Testament. So it's always been a struggle as an atheist / agnostic non-believer to continue to revisit the man Jesus on Easter Sunday or right around Easter, because I do not discount the fact that this was a historical figure. But Jesus is not the first figure who paid with his life for being a product of the times and trying to change the times that they lived in. And those are strong convictions. And I really like the movie because it shows us the dynamics of who's going to be in charge. What is at stake? If we give Rome too much power, then we lose everything here. But if we're not willing to step up, how can we save our priesthood and then members within Jesus's clique, talking about saving their hide or supporting the cause? And in the end, Jesus is going to be alone. Jesus is going to be alone to deal with these things on his own terms. But again, in a couple of those scenes where he's conflicted, everybody's coming after him. Everybody is wanting something from him. And, Jesus pushes them away and says, heal yourself, right? You have the power within your own thinking and within your own life to be the change that you are talking about. So don't look for other people to save you. Be willing to save yourself. Be willing to save your neighbor. And again, those become very dangerous concepts. And we saw within recent history, men like Martin Luther King Jr., he paid the ultimate price for having influenced so many people and pushed so hard against the grain that ultimately he was going to be taken out. Taken out a little bit differently, but again, during this time period of Jesus, crucifixion, lashing, punishments by the lash. In Jesus Christ Superstar, he's lashed 39 times. And in Scripture, he's lashed 39 times. But that was historically, that was how many lashes you got back in the day for a variety of different things. So that wasn't anything new. What was cool in the movie was instead of showing the face of Jesus as he's being struck, they're showing the faces of these other leaders, Herod and Pilate and these other people who now continue to see him take it, because just like Gandhi, just like Martin Luther King Jr., Jesus was a man of peace. Turn the other cheek. Don't strike back. And that was being modeled, and that's certainly what Martin Luther King modeled his civil rights struggle after the teaching of Jesus and the teaching of Gandhi. So in being a pacifist, in loving those who were persecuting him, he was setting an example for others to live by. So it's just weird how I always, on Easter Sunday, always come back to it. I don't struggle in my life with the idea of being a non-believer, atheist, agnostic, whatever you want to call it. I don't struggle with that. But I do find solace and comfort in much of what I glean from myself, which were the moral and the human concepts that I got out of, especially the book of Matthew, but the New Testament as large. So that's my take on Easter Sunday. If you have not seen Jesus Christ Superstar, holy macaroni and cheese, it's a wonderful production. Whether or not you have timeline issues with it, storyline in the film that doesn't jive up with your thinking of scriptures or whatever, it is a great look at that last 7 days in the life of Jesus, these power plays that are taking place, and the conflicts in human nature, even within the disciples themselves, with the participation of Mary Magdalene shown in here, competing with Jesus's time, the jealousies within the 12, oversharing their time with Jesus. Very powerful film for me, one of my favorite movies of all time. So that's it for today. As always, if you liked what you heard today, please like it. Feel free to subscribe to the channel. There'll be a bunch of other stuff happening in the future. Until the next time, just remember to be good to yourself. Be a good neighbor. Do something kind for a stranger without seeking reward. Don't let the darkness take away your light. And peace, love, and music. All right. Happy Easter.